Welcome in to the Autzen Audibles podcast. I am your host, Jared Mack, and with me is friend and colleague Erik Skopil. And today is Monday, October 14th. So you know what that means? It is a mailbag edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. So before we get in that, Erik, how are we doing today? What's good with you?
I feel like that was the fastest Sunday of my life because I just spent the whole day rewatching that game and working, writing on that game and thinking about Oregon, Ohio State. And now we're on Monday, and now it's another team that we're about to talk about primarily. And yeah, this business, things move so fast. But I think like a lot of people who were at that game, I'm kind of, I guess my head's still kind of at Autzen from Saturday for what was, the more I think about it, one of the best sporting events I've been at in person, and something that I'll probably be thinking about for a while.
Yeah, we also have to be like Dan Lanning and the Oregon football team, and
Yeah.
just do our job, and then maybe celebrate a night, and then get back to work and start prepping for the next opponent. But yeah, no, it didn't really feel like Sunday. I think I'm still kind of messed up from last weekend with Michigan State on a Friday, but
Mhm.
you know, that's neither here nor there. That's a me problem, not anybody who's listening problem.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, so we have a mailbag today coming after Oregon's win over Ohio State. Oregon is now up to number 2 nationally in the AP poll, which I think is that could have been a question for today's show from somebody, but um, maybe
Should
we'll
we
get
make it
into that
one real
later
quick?
separately.
Well, should
Yeah,
we make
I
it
was
one real
thinking
quick?
about
What are your
I was
thoughts?
thinking about asking it and leaving it up to the people, but I mean the people meaning you.
Yeah.
So
The only other
I
person on this
mean,
podcast. Yeah.
yeah. What do you think about that, real quick, before we get into
Uh,
our actual subscribers get questions?
I guess the fact that Oregon has undoubtedly the best win, I'm sort of surprised they didn't get a couple more first place votes. I'm not really surprised Texas isn't still where they are, just because Texas's resume is kind of like the Ohio State resume, where it's kind of unimpeachable. They just have basically blown everybody out of the water and have looked really good doing it, and they have a ton of talent. So I'm okay with Texas being number one. I was just surprised Oregon only got 6 AP first place votes, I guess would be my
Yeah, just
point of
6.
contention. So because Ohio State, I think, had 9 or 10 last week. So I was just surprised that Oregon didn't at least match that total. But that was basically my only thought there. I don't know. Did you have any others? Because I wasn't expecting Oregon to be number one, to be honest. Not that I didn't think they were deserving, but I just wasn't expecting it.
Yeah, I didn't expect it either. I was chatting with Jared, Denny, and Isaac Streeter up in the press box about it, and I think it was Denny who seemed pretty adamant that Oregon would potentially be number one, or at least get like 15 to 20 first place votes, because they do have the biggest win of the year. And granted, it's at home, but it's still against a team that was seen as a college football title contender. Texas will have their chance next week, I think it is, when they play Georgia this week.
This week, I believe, yeah.
Oh boy,
Let me double check on that, but I'm pretty sure we get
that
that.
sucks for me. Darn. They'll have their chance this week against Georgia, and I believe that is in Austin, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't know if I'm remembering anything correctly, because I got the date of the game wrong.
It is on October 19th, so this upcoming Saturday, and it does appear to be in Austin, yes.
Yeah, so maybe that's why they kept it a little more Texas heavy, but look, there's going to be a chance, and if Texas loses and Oregon jumps to 1, there's no way you can have a 1-loss Georgia in there to win, to take over the number 1 spot. So I'm not disappointed or surprised. I was, I guess, a little interested that they only got 6 first place votes. Like you, Erik, I thought they could have matched Ohio State's first place vote, but I still think Texas is certainly deserving of number 1, but it is certainly an argument now after the win over Ohio State. So, all right, let's dive into some mailbag questions. How about it?
Yeah, let's start with one of our favorites here from @Nash_Duccaneer, who asks, "What a great win for Dan and the Ducks. What are your thoughts now on Oregon running the table for the rest of the regular season and finishing undefeated? Autzen Audibles." Nash, appreciate the question. We got some people that were fired up this week. You could just kind of feel it in the questions. A lot of exclamation points this week. I mean, I had them at 12-0 preseason. This was the game that I was most worried about. Michigan was the second most worrisome game. I think the thing that's interesting looking at the rest of the schedule is 6 games upcoming. I think Oregon will be favored in all of them. I think the opening line was 28, Jared, for Purdue this week. Is that correct? Did I see that right?
I'll be honest, I haven't looked this week. I can look right now, though.
Okay,
It's been a
that's what I
busy
saw.
morning.
You're fine. That's what I saw. I think last night I saw 27 or 28, and so my point being, the chances of running the table, I think, is very much available to them. Um, I guess the stretch of the season that I get most concerned about now, just looking at the struggles teams have had with this travel, because it's not like Ohio State's the only team that's gone a couple of time zones over and had a hard time. I think the updated number is 2 teams have now won going across the country. Penn State beating USC being the other this weekend. So I get a little bit worried about 2 out of 3 games being at Michigan and at Wisconsin here in November. I still think Oregon is absolutely capable of beating both those teams. They're better than both of those teams. I'm quite confident. I don't think that's a crazy statement at all. But they have to go out and do it. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I think Oregon absolutely, if I were to pick between running the table and not running the table, I'd probably lean running the table. But I also acknowledge, like, traveling to the Midwest 2 out of 3 weeks could be tough. And the style of play, I think a thing that stood out to me watching Washington briefly against Iowa, they just looked kind of zapped after that game against Michigan. And you think about the travel that went into that too. So I think just a little bit in the back of my head of like, and again, I'm still saying I think they absolutely can run the table, but the case for it not happening would be maybe Michigan kind of wears them out. A couple weeks later, they go to Wisconsin. Wisconsin starts playing better. They get better in the trenches, and Oregon just doesn't quite have its fastball in that game, and it doesn't play to its best and drops a game like somewhere like that. But I even think I don't know, Jared, do you agree that the odds feel like more likely they would go 6-0 the rest of the way in the regular season? Or do you still kind of, I know you picked one loss, but this was the game, at least recently, you'd be kind of focused on. Where's your head, I guess, on this one?
Yeah, I think the odds are better that it's a 6-0. It's an undefeated rest of the regular season. Yeah, I had Oregon losing to Michigan. That was my one loss. I had them beating Ohio State originally.
That's right.
I had them losing to Michigan on the road. Honestly, I mean, that was preseason. I thought Michigan would be a lot better this year. They are not great.
No.
Mostly on the offensive side of the ball. They have some real studs on defense because that could potentially present a challenge for Oregon. But like we were just talking about, if they are worthy of receiving first place votes and are in the same breath of air as Texas, they should do what Texas did and make that basically a blowout and stop the rushing attack and force Alex Orji to throw the ball, which he really honestly can't do, and just put up enough points. Because the thing is with Oregon and Michigan, like they have to put up not as many points as people might expect for them to maybe feel a little bit comfortable in that football game. So I think I think the odds, are better for an undefeated run because Wisconsin is weird. They're kind of a weird football team this year. I'm not really sure what to make on them, but I don't think they're that great. And I think Camp Randall's certainly going to be an incredible environment, and that's going to be a real struggle for Oregon with the travel and with the environment. I just think that Oregon is significantly better, and they've proved it this past week, and they have to prove it again this week, which we'll get to later on in the show. But I think the odds are better for them to remain undefeated, and I'm not overly concerned with Michigan and that game as I once was at the beginning of the season, given Michigan's struggles and Oregon's ability to adapt and work around like offensive line issues and everything else.
Can I ask you to help me with a homework assignment real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Who would you say are the 3 most difficult? Which games are the 3 most difficult games left? Because I'm going to do a story this afternoon on ranking the upcoming opponents and the games, and it's like if Washington hadn't just gotten absolutely obliterated by Iowa, there would have been like a case to have them second or third. But now you just I just can't include them there. And Illinois almost lost to Purdue, and so like I want to put Illinois number 1. But I'm kind of feel like maybe I should put Michigan number 1 because I think the top tier talent, they have the best, but they, as we said earlier, I don't know if they can throw a forward pass with any consistency. It's kind of tough. That's part of the reason I think it's like we said, the odds feel maybe in the favor of running the table from here.
Yeah, I would say Michigan is by far the hardest opponent. not only is their top end talent better than Illinois, it's also on the road in the Big House, which Oregon hasn't traveled to in like, I don't know, 15, 20 years now.
Yeah.
So I think that's very clearly the number one. I think Illinois is very clearly the number two. And I think Washington, Maryland, Wisconsin, Maryland, Purdue is how I would rank it.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm with you on the top two. The 3, the 4 is hard. And I go back and forth because I don't know about you. I was pretty impressed by Washington and the way they closed against Michigan. I thought they kind of showed some stuff there. And then they lose by 30 on the road to an Iowa team that wasn't competitive with Ohio State. So, I mean, I don't really know what to make of the Huskies, maybe more so than anybody else on the schedule, probably with the exception of Wisconsin, who's also been just like a total roller coaster.
Yeah, they're weird. Washington's offense is awesome, but when
I was really impressed.
It's terrible.
That's the other part.
Their defense is also not the best. Like, again, Michigan as the measuring stick is tough because their offense is horrible. It's just flat out bad. And if they can run the ball on you, you're toast. And Washington's run defense is pretty good. Oregon's is pretty darn good too. But if they can run the ball on you, you're toast. So if you can just eliminate that, then you have a pretty good chance of winning. So it's tough, but that's how I would go.
Okay. I think it's pretty favorable. I think we both agree the last 6 are favorable. And there's a pretty good chance Oregon's in Indianapolis in December. They're playing for a conference championship in its first year in the Big Ten, which is pretty darn impressive stuff there. I know they made a strong impression nationally over the weekend. Okay, let's move on to this one from @Ducks WTD Forever, who asks, again, starts with "What a win!" ! Despite not playing their A+ game, leaving multiple scores on the table, as well as being without their best pass rusher in Jordan Burch and 2 receivers in Trayshawn Holden and Gary Bryant Jr., they found a way to win. How good can this team be if they put it all together? #Autzen Audibles. I thought it would be fun to just take a quick little ceiling temperature check, I guess we can call it. Well, we know they're good enough to beat Ohio State when they put it all together, because they haven't put it all together and they still beat them, as the question suggests here. I think the thing that was a couple things really stood out to me watching the game over again. I think the first one was how good the defensive front played in the second half, even without Burch. Ohio State ran 12 times for 19 yards in the second half. I don't think while it was going on, I don't think while the second half was playing out, I realized how dominant they'd been against the run in the second. And part of that was they had the fall over Will Howard sack thing that cost them 4 or 5 yards. Yeah. It was really impressive defensive performance on that line. But they don't, again, as the question suggests, there without Burch, I have no idea what his status will be the rest of the way, if they'll get him back at some point. But let's just, for the sake of the question, suggest they do get him back for the stretch run or something, maybe just for postseason. This defensive front can be as good as any. I don't know if any in the country, but they can be up there, right? They can compete. They proved it against an Ohio State run game that we were talking about being like, can Oregon slow this down? Like, in the first half they couldn't. In the second half they figured it out. So that stands out, and I think that's a really encouraging sign when you think about what they can accomplish at the end of the season. Just because I think they're much better in the trenches on both sides. At least both sides performed much better on Saturday than I had kind of expected they could. So I think that was encouraging. I think the speed at receiver, they could do it against Denzel Burke. They can do it against just about anybody. It's kind of how I'm feeling about Oregon's receivers and the way they could create separation. So I'm just kind of thinking about things that translate into these big atmospheres and these big games. And so, right, if they stop making mistakes and they execute and play perfect, this team can win it all. I mean, I think that was the way I was looking at it going into the season, and it certainly didn't change after watching the game on Saturday. And I think the thing that's also pretty encouraging is just the growth we've seen throughout this season. Like, think about where they were against Idaho and then 6 games later against Ohio State, but also think about the things that we were concerned about against Idaho. Like, the offensive line play was all over the place. Like, they couldn't hit a vertical pass in that game. Like, think about how important those were. Did they hit vertical passes against Idaho? I don't was that your?
Oh no, my head cock was
Oh,
someone
okay,
like on
got
a
it.
motorcycle out here, and I was just like, "What are you doing?" But
Okay,
I
no
was just
sweat.
looking out my window.
All right. No, but I'm just thinking like those two things really stood out in the opener of being like, okay, like what's going on here? But then by the time they played Ohio State, those were both strengths. And so I guess I kind of look at this group and think there's room to be optimistic that they'll not only get better, but get better in the areas that are still concerning. And so if you look at this team right now and say like, I don't know, Jared, what are the two things coming out of Ohio State that concerns? Are there two things that like off the top of your head like really
It's
stood out?
tough.
I thought they played pretty dang good across the board, but like whatever those areas are, I think you could see them over 6 more games also clean those up and take another step, which is kind of the process of me going through and saying, yeah, I think this team could be really, really good when it all matters because we've seen such impressive growth in areas that needed to grow,
Mhm.
not only from week to week, but like over the course of half the season.
Yeah, it's tough when you come out of a game against Ohio State or a team that good, and you're looking for problems because you're likely not going to see a lot of those types of
Mhm.
teams until the very end of the season and in January or late December and January. So, I was a little concerned with the lack of a pass rush, but that
Mhm.
was more game plan designed than it was like Mateo Uyunglele and Tatum Tuioti not being talented enough because they did get home. Both those guys had 3 pressures on Will Howard. Obviously, Mateo had the sack, but that was it. Will Howard obviously tripped and fell, but
Yeah.
Mateo was right there to sack him. So, like, they were there, they were solid, and it's tough because that's a really good offensive line. I know Josh Simmons went down, and I think he might be out for the season now. They're Ohio State's left tackle, but they're not playing those types of people every week, and they're not playing those offenses every week where you don't want to give up the big plays because they have 2 first-round NFL receivers. Like,
Mhm.
Oregon didn't really pressure a lot, and a lot of Oregon's defensive pressures come from the linebacker positions or nickel or safety blitzes or corner blitzes off the edge. Didn't really do that. And Dan went into the game saying we have to figure out when is it appropriate to rush the passer from the secondary or linebacker spot. And then he said after the game, he's like, yeah, we did a good job of figuring out when it was appropriate to rush the passer with our linebackers or secondary. So that was something like pass rush was something I was a little concerned about. But then it's like they generate so much pressure from people other than Jordan Burch and
Yeah. Yeah.
Mateo and Tatum Tuioti, where it's like, let's see what it looks like against Purdue. If they have trouble creating pressure against Purdue, even with linebacker help, then I'd be a little concerned. But we'll wait. And then I offensively, I don't really have a lot of problems there. They looked pretty good against Ohio State.
I'd like to see cleaner snaps. It's just rewatching it.
Sure.
There were some
Yeah,
moments where that could
there were a
that
good
could have
amount. Yeah.
been like you think about the bad. It wasn't even a bad snap watching it, but think about the exchange that Ohio State failed on, where Will Howard had to jump on the ball on like 3rd and 3, and how they had to punt afterwards. Those are that like kind of flipped that game. Like if
That was
they
on Will Howard though.
it was no, it was. I'm just saying like, but think about the cost of when those
Sure, like a
exchanges
bad
aren't.
snap in the wrong time.
Yeah, bad or again, this
We
is
don't
like a
have to
pass.
remind Oregon fans about that.
No, they don't. But I
They
guess
are well aware of,
to use a baseball, the pass ball versus a wild pitch, it doesn't matter. The play still
Mhm.
stands where the ball got to a place it didn't. But my point is like that was so costly. That's just a thing that's in my head now. Of we hadn't really seen Poncho have like I think he had a couple that weren't great, but those were potentially really problematic if Dylan doesn't collect a couple of them, and if honestly like one of them did kind of stall a drive and that led to that first missed field goal. But anyway, that's a thing that's in my head now. Like we like to see Poncho be a little cleaner because that really could have flipped some things there if those had been a little more costly. But that's just another.
Okay.
Again, we're nitpicking.
Yeah, offensively, this is kind of what you expect to see from a Will
Mm-hmm.
Stein offense and what Oregon has done the last 1.5 years with him as OC. Like they perform in big games, like against Washington. It was never like for the lack of scoring. Like they were there, they did their job. Just came down to other circumstances and how aggressive they were and other things. But I mean, I thought it was really good. They hit deep. They went over Denzel Burke's head. They were comfortable taking the shorter routes in the second half, more or less. I think it would have been even better if they had Trayshawn Holden because perimeter blocking up points struggled. but I thought Justice Lowe stepped in and did a pretty darn good job as a perimeter blocker. That was something that kind of stuck out on my rewatch of the game.
I
And
totally agree.
if there's no extra repercussions from Trayshawn, which I don't think that there should be, I don't know if there will be. We'll probably find out tonight with talking to Dan. But that's a really helpful guy out there. And arguably it could have been even better for Oregon on offense if Trayshawn had stayed in the whole game. But I'm not going to make that argument because it didn't happen. But again, we'll see how it goes against Purdue. It's going to be a long travel day, but I think that they should win by plenty. They just need to play their game.
This is kind of a digression, but I just thought of it. I was surprised, and clearly this was the game plan, what they wanted to do, but how little 12 personnel and 13 they were in. Because if you look at the snap counts, Justice more than doubled the snaps Sadiq and Herbert combined played. I think it was 44 to a combined like 20 or 21. And that sort of stood out again on rewatch too, of just how they attacked Ohio State, and also I think made the fact that Justice like wasn't a disaster out there. Like he didn't obviously contribute too much. He had the one catch for 9 yards, and he did have some key perimeter blocks on a couple of those run plays. But the fact that he wasn't just a disaster was really crucial for them to execute, I thought, in the second half, and speaks to the receiver depth, because again, this is probably entering the year seen as their number 6 receiver behind the 3 guys who are normally starting, Gary Bryant Jr. and Kyler Casper, with Trayshawn unavailable. And again, as Jared said, we'll see if that continues or not. I'd be curious to see what Dan has to say. We have not heard him address it. But yeah, and then the 2 injured players out. I just thought Justice, like that was kind of low key, a quiet MVP performance there. Maybe not MVP, but low key, a pretty important performance for somebody who hadn't played more than like 15 snaps in a game his whole career.
After rewatching the game, Pat Herbert was a real liability. I think it's
agree.
pretty clear. And I mean, it was bad. When he was out there, he was not blocking people. And not that Terrence Ferguson was doing much better, but for Herbert, like his whole thing is like, hey, I'm here to block people. I'm not necessarily a big pass catcher. And that just didn't happen against Ohio State. It's happened he's been able to block plenty of other teams. It just didn't happen this weekend. And I think Oregon realized that pretty early on those 13 personnel at the goal line, where it worked on the first Jordan James touchdown, but then didn't really work any other time throughout the game. And that's on Patrick Herbert and Terrence Ferguson's inability to block Jack Sawyer or JTT off the edge. And Oregon was like, you know what? It's fine. We're not going to have you people out in the field. We're going to go do something else and try to get quick hitters. So, I mean, it worked on the 4th down conversion to Terrence Ferguson. They went for 13 personnel and tried to throw a fade route or a play action route to Patrick Herbert. Like he's just not that guy in those moments. So I wasn't necessarily surprised by the snap count differential, because like I saw that during the game and I was like, all right, there's no reason to play some of these guys out here, including Kenyon, who isn't a blocker and should only be playing tight end as of right now.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Really be playing wide receiver. I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Yeah. But to Kenyon's credit, I think he played like 9 snaps. He did, and I guess this also ended up being the play didn't count because there was an offensive penalty, but he did draw with a route. He drew what would have been a penalty that would have been really crucial. So credit to him for making some plays. And the last thing I was just going to say on the, not regarded to Herbert's play as much, but I thought it was fun. We saw something added off of that set. We saw, we've seen them now run out of that. We've seen them now do a couple of things out of it, but to see like something off the backside, some sort of pass route off that, we hadn't seen, I don't think, a throw from that formation. So that was kind of a fun thing. And I guess we'll be kind of looking at the rest of the season to see what the next kind of iterations of that will be. Okay. Third one and the last one before we hit the break, from @DWeather5. Coming off that big win, which players' draft stocks do you think increased, and which players didn't really do much to help themselves? And he says, I was hoping for Jeffrey Bossa to go off, but I'm not sure how to feel about his performance. #Autzen Audibles. I thought this was big for Evan and Tez. Just specifically going against Denzel Burke and just dusting him on a couple of those plays with really subtle route running and I mean, obviously Dylan helps both those guys by dropping it right in the bucket. Like the more I've watched those throws, like those are two of the better deep balls I've seen an Oregon quarterback throw in a minute in terms of the touch and just the ball placement. The one to Tez was like basically perfect. And it was probably 38, 40 yards in the air or something like that. So those helped his receivers out, and they probably helped Dylan out to a certain degree. I just don't know if he's the one helped the most, because I'm still not sure how attractive a 6-foot, 24-year-old quarterback is going to be in a draft market. But I didn't expect Bo to ultimately be a first-round pick, and maybe Dylan will end up being taken somewhere a little higher than I think, because he'll perform really well, and he's obviously very mature. But I think Tez and Evan's ability to kind of like put Denzel Burke, at least for a couple plays, on blast, and Evan, I think over the course of the game, kind of just outplayed him. Like if you think about some of the other matchups, it wasn't just the long one. So that, I think those guys certainly are candidates. I think the other one offensively I was going to throw out was, I thought, despite PFF's grading, I thought Josh Connerly was really good on some of those run plays. Like a couple of the big Jordan James runs, he just totally set the edge, and either whether it was JTT or Jack Sawyer or other players, he just moved those guys where he wanted to, create the hole and held the blocks. So I thought he had a nice day against, again, like I'm just thinking of places where you're going against elite NFL caliber competition. And we know Denzel Burke's somebody who didn't look great on Saturday, but will be drafted high. And we know JTT and Jack Sawyer, who were both pretty quiet. I think JTT probably had a little better of a game overall. But it was good to see Connerly at least have a handful of moments where he kind of moved those guys around and did what he needed to do. So those were the ones offensively that stood out the most. And then I'd probably throw in Jordan James, because I think the way he was able to run through contact. And again, like in a game where you're going against Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, who are arguably two of, what do you say, Jared?
Pretty darn good.
Top 4 or 5 NFL running back draft prospects, somewhere in there. Jordan outproduced both of them combined. So if you combine the stats, he had a better day. So I think he probably helps himself a little. So those are the 4 guys in my head offensively.
Yeah, I just had a Johnny Cornelius as another guy. I thought he was pretty good too. Similar to Connerly, I thought he did better than what his grade was in PFF, but I'm no PFF person, so it doesn't matter what I say.
We use PFF quite a bit, and I'm just really perplexed by the offensive line grading. But I don't know. I just thought Oregon won at the point of attack a lot more, even on rewatch, than PFF gave them credit for. They had like a 39 pass block grade, and I think Dylan was pressured and forced to scramble like 4 times the whole game. So I don't know. Maybe I'm
they had 19 pressures for Ohio State, and honestly, like in rewatch, I kind of checked out. Dylan just did a really good job of like moving up and moving out of the pocket. So I mean, like it was good, but again, they're going against like NFL guys, so it kind of is what it is. That doesn't happen on a consistent basis for Oregon, and that's all that really matters. Is that they're better when they don't take on NFL guys, basically on all 4 starting defensive line spots. So it is what it is. I use it more for snap counts than anything else. Which in this game was really interesting, because if you want to know who the staff trusts and doesn't trust, then go on PFF and look at the snap grades, or go on Duck Territory and look at the snap counts. Because they played 34 kids this entire game. So that's pretty telling about how little, because they played 61 or 64 the week before. So just cutting the team in half or something like that. But defense draft grades, Mateo and Tatum, obviously not in this year's upcoming draft, but next year. They're certainly putting their names on the watch for next year's draft if they both decide to leave early.
Mateo was awesome in this game on rewatch. He was really great.
Yeah, he was really good, which kind of goes back to the other question of like, what am I concerned about? Like, I'm not overly concerned about Mateo when he plays against Purdue or Wisconsin, or maybe Washington down the end of the line. Like, I feel like he'll be fine. He's shown in previous games, even against better offensive line, that he can still get to the quarterback on them. So not overly worried there. Harmon and Caldwell, both really good. Harmon obviously had the better day. I still thought Caldwell played really well. Derek is certainly, he has another year of eligibility left. I don't think he's going to use it. If I were him, I'd go to the league after this year. He's a real monster. I'm not sure if he still leads the interior line in college football and pass rushes. I'll look that up as I'm talking, but he did for a long part of the season, and he's got to still be up there. He had another 3 pressures on Saturday. I don't really know if anybody in the secondary necessarily helped themselves. I wouldn't say that anybody in the secondary necessarily hurt themselves either. Yes, Derek Harmon is still the leader in pass rushes, or excuse me, total pressures this year in college football. So pretty good. But secondary, I think everybody kind of just they were there, didn't do much.
I think Nico Reed didn't help his draft stock, but he helped his stock with Duck fans to a small degree. If you actually watched it closely, I thought he actually played much better. I was worried he was going to be a liability, and he wasn't. And like, I thought it was interesting looking at PFF's data on who was targeted the most. Brandon Johnson was the guy they went after. He was targeted on 11 of 33 passes in this game. Which was interesting to me.
Some of that is tough because it's just like where he is in the zone defense.
True.
And you're just
that's
like,
hard.
You're the closest defender. But it was 11 for like 82 yards.
I think that's almost exactly right, Jared. Yeah, I was going to say it was less than 100.
Yeah, 11 for 82. Let's go to Denzel Burke. You want to talk about somebody whose draft stock took a major hit?
Can I guess how many yards he gave up first? Because I haven't.
Yeah, you can guess all of it. Go for it.
Okay, I haven't guessed. I haven't looked at this. I'm curious on Burke. I was going to say, based upon the 2 long completions he gave up, and I'm going to say over 145 yards.
Over, yeah.
What is
well
it?
Over. Denzel Burke was targeted 8 times. He allowed 8 receptions for 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yes. Dylan Gabriel's passer rating was 158.3 per NFL passer rating. And for those who don't understand, that is literally perfect. You cannot have a better passer rating in the NFL. So that and Denzel Burke also was the guy who was hit on the onside kick. So bad day at the office for Denzel Burke. You want to talk about decreased draft stock? Yeah, it was not his best performance. He was also targeted on the Ferguson 4th down long pass.
I was going to bring that up. Like he was not really in coverage but he was the player on that. He was the only player on that side of the field they went to on that play, and he just was not able to get Ferg down at all.
Yeah.
So a tough game for him. I know Ohio State people were really disappointed based upon what I've seen on social media and also talking with a couple of the Bucknuts guys. There was just a lot of like, that was not the guy we thought was going to be a liability, but he was. Is there anything else here? I mean, I guess D. Weather brought up Bassa and hoping he would go off. He had a couple nice moments. He had some not so nice moments against elite.
He was fine
against elite talent. Like it's hard. Like he had a play where Winston Judkins, not that he like broke his ankles, but it wasn't able to get him down on a catch, and that extended it a couple of yards. But I didn't think there were like major issues. I actually thought linebacker play was a little better than I thought going in. And I thought Devin Jackson in particular, not that he's a draft prospect, but I thought he had some real wow moments and also some coverage busts. But that's a guy who probably long-term helped his stock. But again, it's not going to pay off this year.
Yeah. Linebackers were fine. There were some coverage busts. G. Scott got open in like the middle of the field a lot. And I think that's more just like Oregon really focusing on the other guys. And it kind of stinks when it's like a 3rd down situation if you're Oregon's defense and you're Tosh Lupoy, but not the worst thing in the world. Like Bassa's non-interception, whatever you want to call it, like that was really good coverage. That was just a perfect throw from Will Howard. And that was something I took away on the rewatch. Will Howard had a lot of good throws.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a lot of times where Oregon was in coverage, was draped all over the receiver, or was able to potentially make a play, and Will Howard just put a ball exactly where it needed to be, and Oregon couldn't do anything about it. So overall, from the linebackers, I thought it was fine. Couple blown coverages, but it seemed like it was more communication than anything. They were able to limit damage, and honestly, the speed on the sidelines is what really helped them the most. When Henderson or Judkins just tried to kick out, they just couldn't. They couldn't do it as easily because if an offensive lineman didn't get a body on Jeff or Devin, they were right to the sideline and pushing them out. It was just like what we watch every week with sideline tackle or mod bracket. So I thought they did a good job there.
My favorite Devin play was the play where he was signaling to, I think, Savage, the defensive back, like while the ball was being snapped, and then he realized the play had started, and then he made the tackle for like a 2-yard gain. I was like, that's my guy. Just like what clearly had no idea what was going on. When the instincts, when the instincts, hit in, he was like, boom, I know what I need to do. I just go tackle the guy with the ball. Who cares about all this complicated verbiage and stuff? No, I just go get that guy. So yeah,
love that.
I don't have anybody else that really jumps out here. But obviously on a day like this, with as many scouts were here, a lot of attention, and a lot of these guys, at least whether they really overtly helped their stock or not, at least went against guys that will be good measuring sticks for the NFL scouts that were here. Like people will come away having stronger opinions on these players, whether it's good or not, just because of the fact this was elite talent versus elite talent.
Mm-hmm. All right. We are going to take a quick break here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. When we come back, we have 2 more questions left in the show. I think it's 2. Yeah, it's 2. We got 2 more questions left in the show. So we'll be back in a little bit. All right, we're back on the Autzen Audibles podcast in our mailbag edition. Like I was saying before the break, we have 2 more questions to get to in this edition. So, all right, Eric, let's go ride.
From @PascoDuck, is Purdue the trap game?
Yeah,
it's on a Friday night after a really emotional game on the road, and this is the first time Oregon's made a trip out to this part of the country. And I don't know the exact tally on the stats. I guess I could probably do it here on the fly because Washington did lose, and USC lost at home. So that was I think it's now 2-9. Big Ten teams are going 2 or more time zones over. That's like not a thing in my mind. So like these are the components of a trap game, right? It's like on a short week after an emotional game against a really good team. It's on the road across the country. The problem for this scenario is Purdue is not good enough for it to really, in my mind, to qualify as a true trap game. Now, I will say they have my attention a little bit more by the fact that they almost beat Illinois in regulation and then forced a couple of overtimes and couldn't pull it out. But I thought that was going to be like a butt kicking, which it kind of was. It looked like for parts of that game, by the way, Jared. So I don't know if Purdue's good enough to actually make this a real trap game, but it has all of the fixins, I would say, of a trap game in terms of just short week on the road. This team this is their Super Bowl, and Oregon is traveling across the country.
Yeah, this is very clearly the trap game. Like Eric went through, it's a short week after a huge win. You have to turn around quickly because Oregon's going to be leaving on Thursday for a Friday game, like probably Thursday in the morning.
Yeah.
The 2 time zone games, I understand that it is 2 and 9. Not a lot of these games are overly surprising, though. Like I would say, look, so USC has lost twice in multiple time zone travel. They went to Minnesota and lost. That was surprising.
That was.
Maybe not now when you look at what USC is, but at the time, certainly surprising. And then they lost to Michigan, which at the time wasn't really surprising. Michigan was still pretty highly thought of, and they played a really good game against USC. Yeah. Michigan State was another one. They lost to Oregon. Not surprising. Washington lost to Rutgers.
Kind of evenly matched teams.
Knowing what we know now, more evenly matched teams. But at the time, it was like, wow, that's a little surprising. Still a close game, though. Northwestern lost to Washington. Not surprising. Northwestern is not good. UCLA lost to Penn State. Not surprising.
Shocking. Stunning.
Yeah. Wisconsin lost to USC. I don't know. That's a weird team. Those are 2 weird teams. And then Michigan lost at Washington, which was, albeit surprising for sure. Even though I like Washington's offense, that was a bit of a surprising game to see.
But Washington was also favored in that game, so like it wasn't like a complete like, oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't overly surprising. So of those games, what is that? 3 surprisings, maybe surprisings. Ooh, that glass still okay?
I'll show it to the viewers here. We got a chip here on the glass. That was a bad landing from mug 1 to mug 2. So bad work there. Anyway, sorry.
So, anyways, the 2-9 stat I think is a bit overblown, like a bit hyperbolic when it comes to this, because like you pointed out, Eric, like Purdue is not that great. And Oregon, I checked earlier, is a 27.5 point favorite. So it's basically 4 scores in 7 years. They should win this game by a lot, but it's a trap game. There's one of these every year for every single team, good or bad. And it's been Stanford recently. I think I remember people come from the Big Ten comparing Purdue to the Stanford of the Big Ten. The Friday night game, it's a pretty good environment, small town vibes, real college town in West Lafayette. It's certainly a trap game, but Oregon really doesn't let themselves fall into these, and they usually answer immediately, like on the first or second drive, where it's like, oh no, Oregon came to play today.
And we'll obviously dive into Purdue fully here, and I'll have to do more digging in, but I'm going to guess the allowing 40. How many points did Illinois score? Was it 50 in that game?
50.
Ultimately?
They won 50-40.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I couldn't remember if it was 40-30. Yeah. So allowing 50 there is not going to help their defensive stats. But my point was going to be, I just think this is a game where Oregon will have to stop itself on offense, because Purdue certainly isn't stopping Oregon when Oregon has the ball. If you just look at what they've done this year defensively, it's weird because their coach, Ryan Walters, is a former defensive coordinator, very highly thought of in the coaching circles, I think. Whatever he's doing is just not working, or they don't have the talent for his scheme. It's probably the second, honestly. He's probably trying to do things that are above his skis with his talent, but this defense is terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go through the scoring numbers.
Go for
because
it.
Look, like, all right, so Purdue won their first game of the year, 49-0 over Indiana State. Go Sycamores, shout out Larry Bird, but not a good football team. Purdue then lost to Notre Dame 66-7. They lost to Oregon State 38-21. You thought the world was going to collapse because of how happy Oregon State fans were. Then they lost to Nebraska 28-10, lost to Wisconsin 52-6, Wisconsin on. And then Purdue lost to Illinois, as we were just talking about, 50-49. They can't stop a nosebleed. No. Oregon should, I'll have to go deeper into all these numbers, but Oregon should just be able to run the ball.
Yeah.
As simple as, like, they can go score 6 touchdowns on the ground. Jordan James get 3 or 4 of them. And then they can bring in all the playmakers behind them. So this, again, trap game special, like highlighted in yellow on every calendar, but I don't think it should be that much of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, maybe, yeah, I think it's sort of fair. It's kind of like what Arizona State was a year ago, where I think it was kind of smack dab in the middle of kind of not a terribly challenging part of the schedule, but like the stretch one where you had to win all the games, and we knew Arizona State wasn't very good. And it was on the road, and you got does Kenny have the script against Dan? All these kind of little. It's not, maybe Purdue's actually more trap gamey, but ultimately when the game started, it was like, oh, that's right, Oregon's just not going to be stopped at all, and Purdue's just totally out, or Arizona State in that case was totally outmanned. I think that's what this week's going to be like. Let's finish it up with this one from @McKinney's 5. Assuming Jordan Burch is out for a while, does the edge position have the depth needed to withstand the grind of the remainder of the Big Ten schedule? And then he said 10 and 44, who are Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti, played a lot of snaps. #Autzen Audibles. They sure did play a lot of snaps, Jared. You want to hit us with the numbers and the snap counts there? Because I think it was like maybe 10 or 12 snaps. One of them wasn't on the field total.
Yeah, so Kobe Savage and Ty Sheem and Jabbar all played 69 snaps, which is very clearly at the top. And that's basically every snap that could be played on defense. Tatum had 62, Mateo had 61, so they didn't see the field for a combined, 18 or 15 snaps, excuse me.
So, yeah, very, very low number.
They played all game. And again, like I said earlier, this is about who the staff trusts the most, these types of games. So I'm not surprised to see that. Guys like Jaden Moore got 8 snaps and they were all pass rushing downs. I'm not even sure that he dropped into coverage ever. And then that was basically it, other than Amarion Winston, who plays 3 tech. He's not even really
Yeah.
like an edge rusher, but he lined up on the edge a couple times, which
Yeah, I need to
is kind of what I
reclassify. I need to
expected.
reclassify him in my brain because I just think of him as being an edge. But you're right; he basically is sparingly playing there now.
Yeah, he played 26 of his 26 snaps on the defensive line. So,
Okay.
but he kind of moved over. Like a lot of the times, Amarion has played little like 3 tech, like where Jamari Caldwell would line up. But this time he did play a couple more times outside, which yeah, it was really nice for Oregon that he has that versatility to do so. But um, I would expect most not going as for as long as Burch is out. But I don't know. Dan's comments about Burch were really weird after the game. It was like, yeah, we tried to get him to go tonight, but I feel for him because he's like at home watching this game. It's like we saw him on the sideline.
Yeah,
Like
he wasn't
he's
at home.
probably in the locker room right now.
Yeah,
So
he's probably like 20 feet from where we are.
yeah. So, but it was weird because he's like, yeah, he tried to give it a go tonight and just couldn't. And it's like, oh, okay. So is he? And then he acted like he was going to be out for weeks at a time. I gotta go find the quote.
Yeah, find the quote. So to the Burch bank, I will see if Dan will give us information this evening on like if he expects Burch to play again this season. I had heard something a little more optimistic, but I don't really want to share it because it's just hearsay at this point. But we'll see what Dan says publicly. To the point of this question here, while Jared pulls up the quote, I think they do, but I also would say if Tatum and Mateo are playing like all the snaps, I would get a little wary of like what's the contingency plan if one of those guys is unavailable. Blake Purchase is like just totally out of this rotation. Jaden Moore is just a pass rush specialist. These two guys are being relied on essentially every meaningful down for the entire game. And so I would say I'm a little bit, but I also would say like I think they're really talented and they have a lot of young players there that are intriguing. And so while you wouldn't be getting elite top tier contributions if like say you needed Blake Purchase or you needed Elijah Rushing to play, I also think the schedule's at a point here where if you had a game one of those guys had to play a lot, I think you'd be probably totally fine. So I think they do have enough depth. It's just after, again, the guys that played on Saturday, none of those guys are really players we know a ton about. And Blake's the guy we know the most about, but for whatever reason, I think we kind of know the reason, has gone from being somebody who played a little bit last year to not being at all involved this year.
Yeah, I have the quote. Let's see. This is where Dan starts. And I know Jordan's probably sitting at home just as proud as these guys being able to do the next man up mentality. He's probably in the locker room. And we thought there might be a chance that we would be able to see him out there. We weren't able to see him out there, obviously, but we always want to protect our players first. And Jordan is just blah, blah, blah. So we'll see. We'll see what Dan says tonight, if he does say anything. I just thought it was interesting because like the way Jeff and all the other defensive players talked about him made it seem like he was going to be out for a while. But then Dan's like, we thought he might see him out there. He just, just wasn't able to give it a go. And it's like, all right.
I think that's, I could be completely wrong here now, but like, I think that's him feeling like he needs to continue to gamesmanship it after he was listed as questionable.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I don't think he was questionable. He wasn't in uniform as far as we could tell. So I'm guessing this was like, we put him as questionable, so we have to say he almost could have played when in reality he was out once he suffered the injury on Thursday, but we didn't want to say he was out at 2 hours before kickoff. So but that's my read.
Yeah, I'd love to go back and see the availability reports and those listed as questionable to see if any of them actually played meaningful snaps.
I don't think anybody has.
Because I know
I don't even know if anybody's played that was listed as questionable. Did they?
Matt Bedford played when he was listed as questionable against Oregon State, but that was for like 2 snaps at the very end of the game.
Yeah, he did. You're right.
I'm saying like meaningful snaps. Like, hey, this guy is questionable, but here he is on 2nd and 6 in the first quarter. Like, I don't know. So maybe a fun exercise, but really not that fun.
Really quick exercise. There's only been a couple, and there's probably been 6 guys all year listed as questionable. So we could do that one. Did you have any other thoughts here on depth concerns? Did you? I mean, did you kind of agree with my premise of like, if they needed to replace a Mateo or a Tatum, they've got players talented enough, but not players we've seen, or and because again, I'm looking at the schedule going maybe in some of these, like maybe against Michigan, you really need both of these guys, but there's like against Purdue, against Maryland, maybe even against Wisconsin or Washington, you could probably get by even if you're playing. Like if Jaden Moore had to play 40 snaps suddenly, I think you could probably make it work.
It wouldn't be my favorite thing.
No. But to withstand the grind of the schedule, I think they
Sure.
could still win these games, even with like a subpar player playing or an unexperienced, unreliable player playing more.
Yeah, I think for the most part, yes. I'd throw Ashton Porter in that group too.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't see him play against Ohio State, but we saw him play a little bit against Michigan State the week prior.
Right.
So, and he had a family problem, so he was out for like a week and a half. So I'm sure he's just trying to like get back up to speed. But he could be a guy who could come in against Purdue that if they want to bring Mateo or Tatum off the field. I also don't think that a lot of the teams Oregon is going to face moving forward will be on the field for almost 70 snaps. So that would also help in terms of like dealing with, load management type situations. But there is some talent back there. I'm still a little concerned about it if Mateo or Tatum goes down because it's such a huge gap between whoever's up next. And same with the interior defensive line. Like if Harmon or Caldwell goes down, that's a big loss. I thought Amari played really well against Ohio State, but
he did. I agree.
Still, it's a big gap between Harmon and Amari, and not that that's Amari's problem. He's just a sophomore, so he doesn't know any better. He's just balling out there. So yeah, there's some concerns, but I mean those two guys are awesome, and Mateo and Tatum. So I think they'll be just fine as long as they're healthy.
Yeah, I know I gave Mateo some flowers earlier, and I think he probably had the better of the two players' games just because he made a lot of plays at or behind the line of scrimmage in this game. I think more than even he was credited for, to be honest. I thought Tatum was really good I think a thing with him that stood out to me is he's a better athlete in space in terms of making tackles, or at least making players making the angles more difficult on run plays and stuff when he gets in space than I had maybe anticipated he would be. So I think they're set with those two guys. I think you feel really good about them in the interim. But yeah, again, if they lose a guy here, you're relying on guys who just haven't played many snaps, and that always gets a little worrisome. Even though, like if you look at the recruiting rankings, they would tell you like Oregon's got a lot of guys.
Yeah, and that's just like every team. That's pretty simple. Like you have your starting 11s on both sides, and if people go down more or less, like it's going to be people who haven't played a lot of snaps, but they're full on like Dan Lanning guys. Like this is who they brought in, so they have to have some confidence in their ability to be out there on the field. But I think that'll do it for us. Eric, you got anything?
No. Hope all the listeners had a fun weekend. I'm sure some of you are recovering now that it's the start of your work week. So be easy on yourself this week. That was and make sure you took. I know Josh Pate. I don't know if you listened or watched Jared, but he had kind of a message to Oregon fans about just appreciating how special, how that game was maybe a once in a lifetime kind of atmosphere and game and stuff. And I listened to that, and that kind of resonated with me. So for those listening, I would say just appreciate what we watched on Saturday. And if you were there in person, that might be one of the best sporting events you attend in your lifetime. And for me, it's certainly up there. It might be right at the top at this point.
Yeah. Everyone enjoy it. Oregon plays Purdue this upcoming Friday on 5 p.m. Pacific time. I will be there. It'll be a good time had by all. But I think that's going to do it for us on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Please leave a like, leave a comment. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated. But that'll do it. So for Erik Skopil, I'm Jared Mack. Thank you for listening.
Talk to you later, folks.